Okay, Aimee, I'm so excited to have you on the podcast today. So grateful that we have become friends and for all of your incredible wisdom. And I just can't wait to share you with anyone that listens to this podcast. So, for anyone who isn't familiar with you, Aimee, I know you're a really big deal in the coaching space, but if someone isn't in that space and they don't know of you yet, can you just share a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. I always love talking with you. Um, so I am a marriage and family therapist slash relationship coach. And so I've been working with couples and individuals for like close to 30 years. And I also train other coaches how to work with relationships in their coaching practices. So that's what I do.
Amazing. And you have two incredible boys who are bodybuilders.
Yes, yep. I have
So amazing.
boys. They're 25 and they're the loves of my life. So yeah, they're awesome. They love to work out and do physics. They're little physics nerds that are also bodybuilders. So it's kind of
So
a
fun. And we all got to spend time together in Hawaii. So that was really fun and unique. But okay, today we're going to talk about relationships in general and then hopefully go into some cool little nuances that I feel like you're an expert on. So, just out of curiosity, like what led you to wanting to do this or feeling like this is your life's work or your life's calling?
yeah. I've just always loved relationships. Even as a kid, I just was always watching people and couples, and I've always been a connector. Like I love to connect one-on-one with people
Yeah.
uh, and create meaningful relationships. And so I was always just intrigued by relationships and what made good relationships and what made challenging relationships. And my parents got divorced when I was about 12, so that added another piece to it. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I've just always loved this work.
That's so cool. So you were telling me that you in like, during the pandemic you saw this like huge like need for coaches and for people who could help others with relationships. And so I'd love to just talk a little bit about that, like how I feel like too, people have really become so much more aware of their relationships because I think before the pandemic, everyone was just kind of like busy and in their lives and not paying attention to it. And then we all got stuck at home with each other. And people became so much more aware of the dynamics and that maybe the things that they just kept themselves too busy to pay attention to. And I love that that's always something that you say, like, have awareness, like, be willing to look at yourself, be willing to think about who you are and what you're bringing to the table. So let's talk about that and what you think about all of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of a sudden we were home and all these things that we maybe were had been avoiding with busyness were like right in front of us, right?
Hmm.
And so and I think for there was so much good that came out of it. I think people did become aware of a lot of different things, things that were good about their relationship as well as things that were difficult because there was no escaping it, right?
Yeah.
There was nowhere to go. So yeah, so I just think it was an interesting time and a time for people to have more time to have awareness. I think people were home listening to podcasts or they were, watching different things. And my practice actually was really busy during the pandemic. A lot of different businesses had to close down, but
Hmm.
like it's something that people really dove into during the pandemic.
Yeah. Well, I remember my therapist, I actually was meeting with my therapist twice a week for a while during 2020 because I had just horrible, debilitating postpartum depression. And so she was like, let's meet twice a week for a while until you start feeling better. And then we can spread it out or whatever. But she also told me that she was so slammed during 2020 that she just felt so bad. She just kept having to turn people away because the need was so great during that time. So that is really interesting. And then as you started working with those couples or those, relationships, where do you start with someone who's like, "Oh my gosh, I'm looking at myself and it's kind of scary. Like maybe I don't like what I see." What do you tell people when they first start to uncover some of those things about themselves?
Yeah. So I always say the first step is really untangling because people are really tangled up in their relationships.
Mhm.
Um, and so a lot of it is unraveling that and helping each individual come to know who they are and what they want so that they can stand on their own 2 feet, but yet still be close to each other. Um, and and so the first step of untangling is um, like self-reflection. It is like taking a look in the mirror, and getting to self-confrontation. And yeah, sometimes, especially in relationships, because relationships hold a mirror up to us,
Mm-hmm.
reflects back like who we are and how this person that you're so close to, how they experience you. And yeah, sometimes we don't really like what we see, but the beauty of it is if we're willing to look at it, we may not like it at first, but that is the path to freedom, right? That is the path to growth if
Yeah.
we're willing to look at it. So a lot of times I'll just help them be a compassionate observer, right? So
Mm-hmm.
they can learn how to observe not only others, but especially themselves with compassion, so that when they see these things that they maybe don't like, rather than judging themselves and going to shame, they're able to just take a look at it with compassion. Because I always say, um, when we look through a shame lens, if we immediately go to shame, shame keeps us from accessing the very thing we need to move forward.
Mm. Okay.
So if we have shame, the shame is going to kind of distract us from looking at the information that's there. But if we can peel back the shame, be compassionate with ourselves, we'll see, oh yeah, this is a thing that I do that I really don't like, that I do, that I really do want to change. And
Yeah.
that's the information you need to be able to move forward.
Yeah. I love that. So what if someone is feeling shame, what do you tell them? Like what are some tips or what are some things that they can do to not just feel stuck in that?
Yeah. Well, I always go to the three C's: compassion, courage, and connection.
Mm.
So, when people are feeling shame, having compassion for themselves, reaching out to others. So, this is all based on the work of Brene Brown, who's the great shame researcher, right?
Yeah.
And she talks about sharing your story with those who've earned the right to hear it. And so
Mm-hmm.
that connection piece, if you're feeling shame, because shame can only exist in the dark, right? If we hide, and that's what we want to do when we feel shame. We usually want to hide.
Yeah.
But if we can reach out from that and reach out to somebody that we trust and share our story, that will help decrease our shame, right? And
Okay.
that also takes a lot of courage. So I just think
Yeah.
that compassion, courage, and connection are the things that will help us become shame resilient.
Yeah. How do you counsel people who are like, well, I need like that safe person, but I don't know who's safe? Like who has earned the right to hear your story?
Yeah, it's a really good question, right? And only you can decide who you feel comfortable sharing with. But
Hmm.
like for me, I want to know that somebody isn't going to be telling everybody else my story,
Yeah.
right? Like I want to know that that person is going to be confidential and that they're going to take it seriously.
Yeah.
So that's something that I look for. But yeah, I just kind of have to walk them through like who's in your life, who are you thinking about sharing with? Why would you share with them? Why wouldn't you share with them? And just kind of help walk them through that process.
Yeah. I remember, gosh, when Neil and I were very first in his like outpatient rehab program for pornography addiction, I was talking to a counselor in that situation about how I felt so isolated because I hadn't told anyone yet. And I was like, I need someone. I need like one person to talk to. And I remember their advice was just make sure that whoever you're picking, that their identity is not rescuing others. If they're the kind of person that's like always rescuing the person in need, then they're probably not an ideal person. And I didn't understand why at the time. And ironically, I kind of knew in my gut that like the person I was going to tell was that kind of person. But I was like, oh, but she makes me feel so safe. And she's like one of my closest friends. And um, so I went against that advice. And what happened was she totally resented me, down the road when I didn't like reciprocate what her expectations were of me after she had like rescued me.
Oh,
And so that
yeah,
was really interesting. Um, but I don't know, what's your like now looking back, I'm like, was that it? Or what do you think the the I don't know. Do you have anything else? I mean, you said like find someone who you feel like is going to be, hold your story in confidence. So
yeah,
probably someone who you haven't ever heard gossip about other people or share other people's secrets, number one. But
yes.
then also, like, what's your perception of like why you wouldn't want to pick someone who that's kind of their identity to be like other people's like they're the one that comes in and saves the day always.
Yeah. Because I think usually those kind of people have an agenda.
Mm,
Right? And so you want to tell your story to somebody that doesn't have an agenda, or their worth isn't tied to whether or not they help you or whether or not you take their advice, right? So
Interesting.
finding somebody without an agenda makes a difference. So that's somebody that can just like walk alongside you. They're not going to be in front of you, like leading you, telling you what to do,
Mm-hmm.
right? But they're just a friend that can walk alongside you and allow you to feel pain. Um, like I just went through an experience that was really, really emotionally difficult for me. And it was interesting because I would have friends that could walk beside me and just listen and just like kind of hold your hand, right?
Yeah.
Through it all and just like be there and be like, yes, I see you and I'm witnessing this and that is hard and being there for me. But then there were other people that if I would talk to them about things, it's almost like they couldn't handle my pain. They wanted me out of pain so badly.
Yeah.
They're like, well, here, you need to do this, or why aren't you doing this? And then that wasn't helpful for me, right? Like I didn't need to
Right.
be told what to do. I needed somebody that could be okay with my emotion. And so I think that's another interesting thing is finding somebody that can sit with you in your pain without trying to fix it or solve it.
Let's talk about that in marriage because I feel like that is something that Neil and I have definitely dealt with at times where when he was dealing with his grief, it took me a while to realize that I was being super codependent with I felt like it was my duty. I felt like if I cared, I would try to like fix this for him because he was in so much pain. And
Yeah.
it honestly took me at least a year and a half, maybe even like the first 2 years to kind of wake up and realize, like, oh my gosh, I'm managing his grief and this is not mine to manage. Like, it's just going to take what it takes. And he's in charge of that and not me. And it's actually not my job to save him from this,
Yes.
from his
Yeah.
feelings.
Right.
But how do you, but a lot of times Neil just like wants, if he sees me in pain, especially if it's something he caused, he just wants it to go away. He's like, here, what do I say? Like, he will literally ask me, like, well, what do you want me to say? Because he just wants it to go away.
To go
But
away.
yeah, but how do you counsel people who, with great intentions, just want like to hurry and fix people?
Yeah. So it's all about taking a look at why. Why do you need to hurry and fix someone? Like what
Mm,
are you avoiding within
yeah.
you that makes it so hard, right, for you to sit there with them? Because there's usually, it's like, well, for him, like in that example that you gave, it's reminding him that he did something that he probably didn't want to do or isn't super proud of, right?
Yeah.
He's like, oh, I just want this to go away.
Yep.
But yeah, I think it's just helping the person take a look at what are you avoiding in yourself? What is it hard for you to look at that
Mm,
makes it hard for you to sit with someone else's emotion?
yeah. And if I'm being really honest with my grief, sorry, his grief and my like role in that, like, yes, I cared and I wanted him to feel better. But if I'm being really, really honest about my intention there, a big part of that was like, I just was like, okay, we got to get back to life. Like, we got to, like, I need you to be a little more functional because you're supposed to be the second half of
Yes.
everything here. You're my business partner, you're my life partner, you're my parenting partner, you're my spouse. Like, I need you to, like, at what point do we start moving on with life? And that it's like a little bit shameful or whatever to look back, but that's the truth. That's the truth of why I was like, yeah, I don't want you to hurt, but also like I need you to function, you know? And then when I finally realized like, oh, I'm just trying to make this go away and it's not my job to make it go away and I just need to let him be in charge. And I started thinking of it like I thought of his recovery, his addiction recovery. I was like, oh, this is not I don't have to manage this. This
Mhm.
is he will figure it out on his own terms. And it was so freeing for me to realize that it wasn't like my responsibility to do that.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's freedom, right? That's freedom
Yeah.
right there when you can let go of that. Although it's kind of feels like free falling first, right? Because you're like, oh
Yeah.
gosh, what is this?
Yeah, that's so true. I love what you were teaching Billy and me on the beach in Hawaii, where so this is kind of a total shift, but it's just something that has like affected my marriage and it's something that I haven't stopped thinking about that I feel like people don't talk about. And sometimes if they do, they it feels like it has to be so extreme that I'm like, whoa, that doesn't necessarily align and it doesn't feel like aligned with this like really good person that I want to be. But you were teaching us that spirituality and sexuality can be or should be um I don't know what's the word that they should coexist, that they're like friends and not enemies.
Yeah, they go hand in hand.
Yeah.
Sexuality and spirituality complement one another. They're meant to be together, not opposites, right? And I think a lot of times, the teachings, like very conservative Christian teachings sometimes, and others as well, are like,
Mhm.
like sexuality is this bad part of us or this evil part of us that we, yes, we engage in it, but we don't really want to talk about it or think about it because it's the opposite of what we want. Like, really, we want to be spiritual. So it's almost like
Mhm.
these two opposing factors when really our sexuality, I believe, is such a beautiful gift from God, and it's such a beautiful part of who we are. It's part of our core identity, our sexuality. And so, obviously, to use it for good and in the way that, fits with your and aligns with your morals and your values. But within a marriage, I think that having a beautiful, connected sexual relationship actually increases your connection with each other and can be spiritual. Like it increases spirituality.
Yeah, that's so interesting because I feel like I know that and it feels right when you're saying it, but it's hard to apply sometimes. And I think that, the other thing that the three of us were all kind of connecting on was that it can be so hard to be like a mom or a wife or working or whatever, where you're giving, 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 giving all day. And then you get to the end of the day and you're supposed to connect. And it's so hard to like switch your mindset into that's something that I want, not like that's something that someone wants from me. So
Yes.
how do you
Yeah.
how do you counsel people who are like, gosh, I want to get better at that, but I'm not really sure how to go about it.
Yeah.
And especially if you're someone who's like, I'm trying to be this like good person with good thoughts and like keep myself really spiritually. I mean, I've had these conversations with other women who are like, I want to surround myself with all things that are keeping me like constantly in a flow with God.
Yes.
So it feels a little like, um, I don't know the right word for it. It feels like a contrast, to
Yeah.
try to like then switch into that mindset.
Yeah. And what I would say is my belief is that God wants us having a beautiful sexual relationship with our spouse.
Hmm.
So we're thinking about creating that connection with our spouse. It is the same thing as staying like focused on goodness and on things
Mm,
that bring us unto Christ and closer.
yeah.
So just, and I know that that's such a big shift for a lot of people because, like I was saying, they think of them as opposite, right? So it's almost like, well, if I'm going to take my brain there, it's taking me away from God. But I would say it keeps you in alignment with God. Um, but yeah, when sex feels like it's something that someone is taking from you,
Hmm.
it does not feel good, right? And so,
Right.
yeah, because you're giving all day and doing all the things, and then it's like, okay, now I have to go give to my spouse. But if you can shift that to thinking of something um, that you're receiving, right?
Hmm.
How you're going to receive love and connection from your spouse. And it's almost like you walk into it side by side. So rather than like being across the table from each other, like, here, can I have this from you? Well, I want that. And it becomes transactional.
Hmm.
If you think of sitting on the same side of the table or next to each other, hand in hand, like almost like it's an amusement park, like, hey, here's this fun amusement park. Like, should we go? Do you want to go with me? Let's go in together. So you're going in together as a way of expressing love and connecting and receiving love. So I think when it can become something that you're receiving, as opposed to just something that you feel taken from, that shifts the energy around it.
Yeah, that's a really good suggestion. Um, I still want like some tips because you gave us some really good tips in Hawaii where Billy and I were like, okay, but still, how do we get in that mindset? Because we're both exhausted at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So how do you counsel women who are like, I want that. There's a desire in me that wants to be there, but like I seriously have a hard time
Mhm.
getting getting to that,
Yeah.
place.
So, Emily Nagoski, in her book Come As You Are, she talks about spontaneous desire versus responsive desire.
Mhm.
So typically, men have spontaneous desire where they are good to go. Like right now, okay, I'm ready, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas women, it just takes longer. Usually, not always, but usually we have more responsive desire. So, um, once our spouse starts making advances, then we start responding and then our desire goes up. So you want to think about if you if you need to get up to a 60, right? If you got to get from 0 to 60 to be like ready and excited about it, and you're living at
Mhm.
0, every single time is going to feel like such a chore, right?
Yeah.
But if you can get to where you live at a 30 or a 40 or a 50, you're going to be so much more excited about it and engaged in it, right? And it's not going to seem like such a chore. So you want to give like that's your responsibility to get yourself there, to be living there. And so whatever is meaningful for you, like I know we were talking about wearing lingerie, like put on lingerie during the day, right?
Mhm.
Wear some lingerie. That will help start getting you in the mood or thinking about it, or send some sexy, flirty texts. Um, but get that started like way before 9 o'clock at night when you're both exhausted and falling into bed and hoping the kids, stay asleep, right? So,
Yes. And the lingerie tip really has been super helpful for me. I kind of like wrote that off after it's funny, like, when at least for me, when we first got married, like, I bought a bunch of that stuff, and then we never used it because it was like, "Oh, the clothes all come off so fast that it's like was like a waste of money." For me now, it's interesting being, like, almost 40 and having 5 freaking kids, like, I still am like, "How do I have 5 kids?" 5 kids and a full-time business, and, um, I'm around Neil all the time, so I kinda wear this uniform of, like people talk about, like, the mama form, so I'm like, sometimes in workout clothes, a lot of times in sweats, sometimes in like, jeans and a sweater like I am today, but it's kind of like this uniform of like I'm either, mom running kids to school or I'm like businesswoman and, doing a podcast interview with you or I'm making dinner for my kids or I'm usually in one of those functions and I kind of have like this uniform for it. So for me, this has been like a brand new thing since we came home from Hawaii when you were like, try lingerie. And I was like, okay, I really haven't like given that like a fair shot other than like every once in a while when we go on vacation. And actually, this was something that you helped me with where I was like, it's so much easier when I'm on vacation. And you were like, why? And I was like, I don't know why. It just is. Cause like I don't have any kids around me and we're in like a sunny place. And that's like why we're there. And you're like, but why? And so that is something that I usually bring on like a vacation, but I don't think about it at home because it's just kind of like, okay, well, we got to do it. So, I mean, sometimes I'm in the mood, but a lot of times it's like, okay, I want to do this because it's a good thing for my marriage. And it's not really like, um, it's harder for me to get there to be like, oh, that is what I want. Like that sounds as good as like a bowl of ice cream at the end of the day, So for whatever reason, that using that lingerie has been helpful for me to be like, I'm putting on a different uniform and this is like the intention right now. This isn't like I'm taking off like the clothes that have like spit up and, half of dinner and flour and whatever all over them. And I'm done with that part of the day. And now this is like the intention. That was super helpful for me. So for anyone who's listening to this, who's like kind of, a little bit later on in their marriage, maybe, and you gave that up years ago, like it's definitely worth thinking about trying again. Cause for me, it's been helpful to just like have even that like few minutes in my closet all by myself. I go in there and close the door and then I just like shift my mindset of like, okay, now the intention is this.
yes. Yeah. And it's like we oftentimes think, well, this is just for my spouse. It's for him because he wants me to wear lingerie.
Right.
I think lingerie is just as much for me, right, as for a spouse because I love putting it on. And I don't know, I just think it does help shift your mind and how you see yourself, right?
Mhm.
Because now you don't see yourself in the clothes with spit up, but you
Yeah.
see yourself as this like sexy, desirable woman or whatever, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Makes
Yeah. That's
And I think even wearing it like so you can think of it as changing like at the end of the day or whatever, or I just think it's fun sometimes to wear it just under your uniform, right? Whatever your uniform is, just
yeah.
like a little surprise, like
Yeah.
whoop, there it is.
Yeah. I love that idea too. That's so fun. And the other thing that I'm bummed that we haven't done this yet, but it was such a good idea and I still want to. was when you were like, okay, your kids are, because you spent time around my kids. So you like know how old they are, or at least my two oldest daughters. We all went to Hawaii and Neil and I took just our oldest two. So you were like, they're old enough. They can watch the other kids and you guys can say like on a Friday night or whatever, like this is mom and dad's night. And you go in, you lock the door and say like, unless there's blood, don't bother us.
Yep.
And we haven't done it yet, but I want to, and that's such a good idea. Um and my question for you was like, well, what if they hear stuff? And
Yeah.
I was like, what if they can tell what's going on? And you're like, I don't know. I loved your response to that. So what was your advice?
Yeah. I was like, yeah, so what? What if they
Yeah.
do? Who cares? Right? Not that you want them hearing like all sorts of things or whatever, but them hearing and knowing that that's what you're doing, like you want your kids to know that you and Neil love each other and that you
Yeah.
have a good marriage and that you want to be together because a healthy sexual relationship is part of a good, beautiful marriage. And you want your kids to have that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so true.
People say that all the time. They're always like, oh no, but what if they know? What if they suspect something? I'm
Figure
like,
it out.
yeah. I'm like, well, they probably will at some point, and good, because this is what married people do, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that was a good mind shift for me to be like, oh yeah, I guess what if? Like it's probably a good thing.
Mhm.
Okay, so another question about all of this, because you talked about like the simmer and keeping the simmer going and um what do you tell couples when they have totally different ways of trying to connect or feeling, it's like the love language thing. If you've got like one person who really likes physical touch and the other person doesn't respond to that well, and then their love language is whatever, pick another one, like words of affirmation. And so how do you tell people to like reconcile those two if they're trying to keep things simmering or not just like have to fully ignite the flame from zero when they're
Like,
finally together?
yeah, I do talk about like keeping it at a sexual simmer. So it's just red, you can just get to boiling at any point, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I think love languages oftentimes are just so misused
Mm,
because oftentimes people will take the little quiz and they'll be, well, this is my love language. This is how my spouse should be loving me. And they almost look at it from an entitled place,
mm,
right? Like, why aren't you doing this for me? This is who I am. You should be speaking my language. But I think it's much more helpful if you can look at it as, I want to know my spouse's love language, almost just like a Christmas list, right? If somebody's like, if you want to give them a Christmas gift, you're like, what do you want for Christmas? Tell me, because I want to get you something that you are going to absolutely love, right?
yeah.
So I think when you can use the information from love languages to learn about your spouse and what they like, then you can give that to them from a place of generosity, never from a place of obligation, right?
Hmm.
You don't ever want it to be like, oh gosh, okay, he likes physical touch. I guess that means we have to have sex again, right? That doesn't ever feel fun.
No.
But if it's like, oh, this is important to me. He loves physical touch. So when he comes home, I want to go sit right by him, right? Like I want to rub his shoulders. Like I want to hold his hand because I
Yeah.
love him and I want to give to him in that way. So I think when couples, so a lot of times I will talk to couples about it just as a way of educating them about this is how your spouse receives love. This is how your spouse gives love so that they can almost see it with more compassion, right? And then they
Hmm.
understand what their spouse is doing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great advice. And I mean, I loved your take on that, so I'm glad we got to talk about it here too. Okay, I have a little bit harder question. Maybe it's not hard for you, but it's always been hard for me when we've shared our story so many times on here and on my blog and Instagram and whatever about Neil being a recovering pornography addict and me being a recovering codependent, and people know that story if they've been following us for a while or we've been friends or whatever for a while. And so when women come to me and they want me to give them advice about how to work on themselves or how to work on their healing or how to make progress. Like I can talk to them for days about that and be so confident and know exactly what to say. But when people come to me and they say, well, what about feeling safe sexually? What about feeling safe in your intimate relationships? What about trust? What about if you have these hurtful things come back up? And I'm just like, uh, I don't know, because I don't have the answer for that. I feel like I've worked on it, but I don't feel like I've nailed it. And um I feel like those things have like healed themselves over time in some ways, and then in other ways, I'm like, I still don't know that I fully understand, or I don't know. So all of that to say, I would love your advice for, a couple who's in that situation.
Yeah. So safety is really, really important. If
Mhm.
you're going to give yourself sexually to your partner, you want to feel safe. So safety matters. And I think having a conversation about that, sometimes it's harder to do just on your own without a coach or a therapist, but you can
Mhm.
do that and talk about what you want and need in the relationship in order to feel safe.
Mm.
Um, and the idea of trust is always interesting because trust really is a choice.
Mhm.
You're never going to actually know if somebody is 100% trustworthy. You just can't ever know that, right?
Right.
Um, but you can look for evidence that they are trustworthy,
Mm.
right? So, um, if you see evidence that someone is trustworthy and you choose to trust them, that's what that looks like, right? You're never
Yeah.
going to get to the point where you're like 100% sure that nothing is ever happening or he's never looking at it at all. You just can't ever know that. But you also don't have to have that knowledge in order to trust. Trust is a choice. But again, I want to highlight like you do want to be intentional about who you trust, right? I'm not saying,
Yeah.
oh, just choose trust, no big deal,
Yeah.
right? But if you see trustworthy behaviors, that's when you can start feeling more comfortable to make
Mhm.
the choice of trust.
Yeah.
Um, and Safety and sexuality is really important. And sometimes, like women will freeze, right? Especially if they have any kind of trauma around it, or if they start having stuff coming to their mind about it, they're going to freeze.
Mhm.
And you
Yeah.
have to address the safety before you can continue on with the sexuality. And so a lot of that is embodiment work and helping women figure out like where are these emotions in their body and what do they need to do for themselves to create safety, and also what do they need to ask their partner for in order to create that safety.
Interesting. So, like, what are some ideas if someone was like, I have no idea where to even start with that? What would you tell them?
Yeah. I would say notice when it comes up for you. Like, do you
Mhm.
find yourself shutting down? Or is it like if you're making dinner and he puts his hand on your back that you like freeze, right? Like, when is it coming up? And then just getting really curious with yourself about, okay, what is this about? Um, what's going on in my brain? Like when we were in Hawaii and I kept, whatever you'd ask me, I'd be like, well, why,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Why is one of the best questions to get inside your brain and see what you're actually thinking. So if you're like, well, I'm not sure what it is, in the moment, you want to get really curious with yourself. The next time you find yourself freeze and be like, okay, why am I freezing? What's going on for me right now? What am I feeling in my body? And just taking it back to that awareness.
Mm. Yeah. That's a really um, good advice. I'm wondering too, like, okay, so let's say that someone is like are trying to do this, they're trying to explore it, they kind of don't know why, but they're trying to choose to trust and all of that, and then they find themselves, you said that like it has to be addressed, and I feel like you've given me great advice with this before. Like, are you addressing that in the moment? Are you addressing it later on when you're out of this scenario, or like how what's the advice there?
Yeah. Not in the moment, right? Like you want to get to where your nervous system is regulated and you're in a more
Okay.
grounded place. That's where
Mhm.
you have that discussion. So in the moment, you want to recognize it in yourself and get curious with yourself to see what's going on. But yeah, that
Mhm.
is not the time to have the conversation with your spouse.
Yeah.
It is an okay time to say, hey, I want you to touch me, but not right now. Or, something's coming up for me. Like you can say something like that to set a boundary or give them a message that now is not the time for you. But yeah, it's not the time to have the conversation until they
Yeah.
calm down. Yeah.
That's so helpful because I think that most of us just feel like, well, we got to talk about it. We're supposed to. And then sometimes like right when the thing happens or whatever, everyone's emotions are heightened and then it's like the worst time.
Yeah. Well, and the
Yeah.
thing that's interesting about that, about taking a pause, is that it allows you to get clear and decide, okay, in the moment, it feels like it's at 100, right? The importance
Mhm.
is 100. And then as you get away from it, you might be like, yeah, this is important, but it's really like a 55, right? So yes, I want to address it, but you're kind of able to see it for what it is and figure out how big of a deal it is for you. And sometimes, honestly, things can go away, right? So that's
Yeah.
another reason you want to get some space from it, because sometimes you'll decide, actually, this is something that I want to let go of. I don't even want it to be a part of things. So I want to let go of it.
Yeah, and that's such a powerful part of for me, at least, it's been such a powerful part of recovery of just, like, deciding on certain things, like, "Oh, it feels right now. I'm ready to let it go. I'm ready to release this. I'm ready to detach from, whatever it's been bringing into my life." So, that's been a really powerful thing for me too. I have definitely, though, heard from women who are just like, I can't get this out of my head, or I can't every time we go to do this, this is like all these thoughts come flooding. And like that's one thing that I feel like I don't relate to. So if you can speak directly to that, I think that'd be so helpful too.
Yeah. Well, and I think if it's really, really like that, I think working with somebody would be really
Hmm.
important, a therapist or a coach to help you with that, because that's very real, right? It's
Yeah.
a trauma response, is what it is. Because when all of that comes into your brain, you end up, again, it like flares up your nervous system, right? So your nervous system is all lit up. And it would be good also, maybe not in the moment, you can't do it, but to write down, like, what are all the thoughts that come to your brain in that moment? Like, what are you thinking? What is this flood that comes upon you? So that you can go back and look at those thoughts individually and be like, okay, what am I going to do with this one? What am I going to do with that one? Do I want to hold on to this one? Because sometimes things feel so true in your brain, but as soon as you write it down and look at it, you're like, oh yeah, that's not even true, or I don't even want to hold on to that.
Yeah.
Get some freedom and power over it that way.
Yeah. I have a question for you too about since you just said like, maybe work with someone. I feel like you have such a unique perspective because you are a therapist and like you put on the therapist hat, but you also have like the coach hat and you understand both of those. And tell me what you think about this because I feel like with women that I've sponsored in the 12 steps or just people that I've known in recovery, the people who, and I've even experienced this to a certain degree myself. I feel like sometimes with therapy, people will go into those situations and they'll turn into a situation where like they open the wound, and then, like, every time they go to therapy, they're, like, opening it back up, and they're picking at it, and they're, like it's like the scab that will never heal because it's just constantly getting picked at, where I feel like, some of the 12-step work that I've done or coaching or things like that where it's a little more forward focused, it gets you out of that, like, let's just obsess about, like, people will call it D-Day, like Discovery Day, or like the trauma and the wounds and betrayal trauma, like all of this stuff. I'm not saying that it's not valid or it's not real, but I see people who tend to get stuck in kind of some of those ruts because it seems like s- sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes in therapy, it can just become like the focal point of like, let's just like keep reliving the past. I don't know. So, what's your perception or like what's your take on that because you have a really healthy way of like doing both.
Yeah. Well, I think healing is being able to tell a different story about it, right? And forgiveness. That's really forgiveness too. Like if you are choosing to forgive, like forgiveness is for us, right? But it's
Mhm.
telling a different story. It's not denying what happened, but it's being able to shift your perspective and tell a different story about it. And so, yeah, when people come in, like we do need to dig in and like find the hurt and like see it. And, I witness it for people and we go through that. What does that feel like? All of the emotional work, right? But then it's like, okay, and now what do you want to do with this? Right? And you don't go there too soon, because if you try to go there too soon, then it's like the wound doesn't get all the way cleaned out. But
Yeah.
you don't want to keep opening it up, but you want to open it up, clean it out, deal with what's there, and then say, okay, now what? Now, what's the story you want to tell with this? How do you want to move forward with this in your life? And I think that's really what healing is. And so when you can take the beauty of therapy and the beauty of coaching and combine it, I just think it's so powerful.
Yeah, it's so empowering to be like to look at that and say, you're in charge. Like how, this is your story, this is your life, and not like this is what happened to me
Yes.
and I have no choice but to be stuck there.
Yes. And
Yeah.
that is where our power comes in, right? That's where we can get ourselves to that empowered place where um, we're no longer a victim to our story. Like we can
Hmm.
still be a victim of something that happened to us, but we don't want to be a victim to our story, right? We can tell a more empowered story and still acknowledge the thing that happened
Yeah.
as true. Um, but how we see it is where we get all of our power.
Yeah. One last question on this topic that I get asked, and I kind of don't, even though I've been divorced and remarried, um, I get questions from women who are like, how, they've ended that relationship, they've ended that marriage, and they're like, how am I ever supposed to trust that another guy isn't going to just come in with all these lies and secrets and that I'm going to get, you know, blindsided. And
Mhm.
I don't, other than telling them like pray about it and God will lead you, I don't really know how to tell someone to like move forward from something like that.
Yeah. Well, and it's tricky, and that's good advice, right? Like being really, if you know yourself, I think if you have really good awareness of yourself, you are
Hmm.
going to be able to pick up on clues from other people, right? You're going to be able to map people that are around you, like mind mapping, right? Like, okay,
Yeah.
I'm picking up on something here, but it is going to come back to not um, to the fact that trust is a choice. And so
Mm.
you're not really going to know if somebody is completely trustworthy. All you can do is go on what you see from them.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And I think too, it was empowering for me when I did therapy in between my first husband and then meeting and marrying Neil
Mhm.
that I did like unpack all of those wounds and all of those hard things. And that I had a therapist that told me, I know it feels like this reality is the reality with every man out there, but like every man is not a bad man. Like they, and or that everyone isn't going to hurt you the way that you were hurt the first time. And that was helpful for me to hear because there's something about going through something that's very real to you that feels like this is the only reality that could possibly exist,
Mhm.
you know, and
Yeah.
that like everyone has a secret or that everybody's kind of going to secretly like ruin your life or something,
Right.
you know. Um that was helpful for me to hear that like no, there is like there are healthy relationships out there. There are people who are happy. And I guess that's like one of the key core messages that you love to share with people about like you're not going to just walk into every relationship and then find out what you're doomed to have to like deal with for the rest of your life, right?
Yeah. Yes. I always say like relationships are meant to be enjoyed, not endured. And so a lot of times people just kind of white knuckle it through their marriages, thinking like this is their duty or this is what they're supposed to do. And
Mm.
it's so sad to me because yes, there's going to be difficulties and trials along the way, but there should be more joy and happiness, right? That should definitely outweigh in the long run. You might go through periods where it feels like it's more trial or more frustration, but overall, on the average, you want to have more joy and happiness in your relationships. They shouldn't just be something that you have to endure.
Yeah, I love that. I really believe that too. Okay, Amy, last question for you. If there is one message that you want the person who's listening to this to remember, what do you want that one message to be?
That relationships are can be difficult, but they're worth the work.
Mm.
Relationships are healing. I think we can grow and develop in relationships um, more than we can just on our own. And so they're worth the work to create a good one. And like I say, they're meant to be enjoyed, not just endured.
I love that so much. Amy, where can people find you and possibly work with you as a coach and therapist or, just learn from whatever you're sharing and posting?
Yes. So you can go to my website. It's Aimee Gianni, and Amy's AIMEE. Um, aimeegianni.com, and you can see me there. And if you want to do coaching, you can reach out to me there through my website. I also have an Instagram, Aimee Gianni MS, and I post several times a week there. And you can also go to my website and sign up for my love notes where I send out emails to your inbox.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Aimee, for sharing all of your wisdom. I just feel like I learned so much from you every time I'm around you. I'm a better person after I spend time with you. So thank you so much for sharing all of this with all the people who listen.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to Mint Arrow Messages. We're so grateful that you spent time with us today. Make sure you go follow us at Corinne Stocco or at Mint Arrow Messages on Instagram. And then if you have a second and you love the show, I would love it so much if you'd leave a rating or a review on Apple Podcasts. That's the only way people can find out about us if they haven't heard about us before. So just go tap the stars, leave a rating or a review if you have a second. We would appreciate it so much.